But the lack of testing could well have played a part in the tragic death of the NHS worker Thomas Harvey, who was just 57 years old when he died in self-isolation at home on Sunday morning after he was believed to have contracted coronavirus while treating an infected patient. Now, police officers had to break down a door to retrieve the body of Thomas, who was dad to 6 kids, after he collapsed on Sunday morning. Now, Thomas wasn't given personal protective equipment such as a mask, and despite spending weeks fighting for his life after developing the symptoms associated with coronavirus, like a cough and shortness of breath and aches and pains all over his body, he didn't actually know if he was infected, of course. His family and colleagues believe his death could have been prevented had he been given a COVID-19 test immediately and hospitalised for treatment. An online crowdfunding campaign has been launched to raise money for his family. So far, £11,000 has been raised. You can find it at GoFundMe if you look for the family of Thomas Harvey. And we're now joined by one of Thomas Harvey's sons, Thomas Harvey Jr. Thomas, it is an absolute tragedy, the loss of your dad. So firstly, I know from me and from everyone at the station, our condolences. But what is so shocking, Thomas, is that your dad was never tested.
So after, developing the symptoms, which, everybody kind of knew about, he wasn't tested. We assumed, considering that, he's frontline NHS staff, that he would have been. And, he had the symptoms that he had were also very, very bad. We were all a bit shocked that, he wasn't tested, especially straight away.
And was there a reason, Thomas, why your dad didn't end up in hospital?
We were told, we obviously spoke through the 111 service a couple times before we had called the ambulance. This was a week before his death, and when the ambulance did come, when his breathing was really bad, he was complaining of being in pain. His chest was very tight, and it was hurting when he was breathing. He also, at that point, he hadn't eaten anything for about 7-8 days. So he was very, very weak, and we were told that his case wasn't bad enough for him to get hospital treatment. And that was that. We then went on to call the 111 service again a couple times before the week before his death, and we were just referred to the NHS website. At that point, we genuinely thought 2 days before he passed, he was eating fruit. We thought he was getting better. And then obviously waking up to, him gasping for air, he had collapsed behind the bathroom door.
It's just utterly heartbreaking, and it does show all of the stages of this terrible, terrible disease. What was he saying to you, Thomas? Were you able to speak to him on the phone in the days before his death?
Yeah, so I live in the same house with him. We would have conversations through the door. We were making sure that we were keeping our distance, and that we weren't in the same space as him. He was isolating in a separate room. The conversations were very few and very minimal because, again, he was so weak, and my dad's usually a person who's very...
Gosh, so you were actually in the same house?
Yeah, we were in the same house. So after the ambulance came the first time, they told us that we also have to isolate because they verbally communicated with us that they think he has the virus, as they've seen other people with it. So they told us to also self-isolate. So we were staying upstairs in the house as well.
I see. And when he passed, you were in the house, is that right? But just a different part of the house?
So actually, I woke up to my mum screaming because the gasp, the noises he was making, you could hear from upstairs. And so he had passed out. So he was gasping for air behind the toilet door, which is where he was on the floor. So he was gasping, and we couldn't get in because the toilet opened from the inside. So I had to punch through the door and rip a hole in so I could climb in. But, we heard like the last few gasps, and we kind of knew by the time I had got in and the police arrived, that it was too late.
God, it's you're living the worst nightmare at the moment. Are you angry, Thomas?
I kind of just don't know how to feel. It was probably, the worst time, the worst kind of situation to be in. His body was left downstairs for about 7-8 hours because, all the coroners and takers were so occupied. And then on top of that, not being able to leave the house, was also another struggle. We still have to stay here. We still have to be here. We have to be here the whole time. And yeah, I think that it's horrible.
Because you were having to self-isolate at the moment.
And still having to self-isolate, yeah.
God. I mean, it's just utterly horrific. And the problem is, testing could have helped, I guess, because at least he would have known earlier for sure, and then maybe you would have been able to get him into hospital.
Yeah, no, 100%. I feel like anybody who is working on the front line in the NHS, regardless, considering that, not everybody's been tested, so regardless if there's any confirmed cases in your workspace, as a member of the society working on the front line, you should be tested. If he was diagnosed straight away, he could have maybe then got the proper treatment in hospital a lot quicker. But it just seems like we were constantly, denied the help.
I know, which is particularly horrific given your dad is one of these heroes that was working for the NHS and taking people's blood and infected, you believe, doing his job.
Yeah, for over 20 years, this is a man who would work every single of his birthdays, every single Christmas. His excuse being that, some of the patients on the wards were by themselves, and he wanted to make sure that they weren't by themselves on public holidays, as we had each other as a family. We were used to opening presents in the evening when he'd come back home, because he literally would work non-stop, selflessly, in making sure that other people were okay.
So he was a great man.
Yeah, most definitely.
And your story, Thomas, and the story of your dad, Thomas Harvey, is why the government has to look after NHS staff, but it's just such a tragedy that it is too late for your family.
Yeah, 100%. I think in doing talks like this, I just hope that the government will realise that, people on the front line really do need to get given the correct funding and the correct amount of time and help, These are people that are putting their lives on the line every single day. So, we hope that no other families have to kind of go through the pain that we did for something that we feel like could have been prevented. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for sharing the story of your dad, who sounds like he was an amazing person. Thomas Harvey Jr., thank you for being here. And of course, the GoFundMe page to help raise funds for the family of Thomas Harvey. You can find it if you go to GoFundMe and look for funds to help the family of Thomas Harvey. What a tragic story.